Right. Hafade todos hamzu. Gwena hudzungi umeegad and umeekungok estigi I nuevo episode Fanachu. Goy host mizu tatlo. Hafade to everyone listening and watching. This is another episode of Fanachu. Once again, I am your host, Michael Lujan Bevacqua. And today we are talking about more Chamorro learning journeys. And so I'm very excited to have some active learners of the Chamorro language here with me in the Zoom right now for today's Fanachu episode. And so just to introduce the topic today, for the past 11 or 12 years now, I've taught Chamorro language in the community. At the start of the pandemic, I started offering my formerly coffee shop classes onto Zoom and, making it available for anyone around the world to attend them every Saturday morning, Guam time. And the response has been amazing. Sort of Chamorros who, and also others from Guam who sort of want to learn more about the language, who want to get in touch with their roots, sort of coming into the Zoom room, connecting to others. It's been a very inspiring experience. And one thing that I've found by every year interacting with hundreds of different Chamorros from across the diaspora through these classes is that a lot of people feel alone, but a lot of people have experiences that are very similar to others in the diaspora and others in the Marianas. That a lot of Chamorros feel like they don't have resources, or they feel sort of a loss of roots because they don't know their language, they don't know much about their islands and the history. They don't feel connected to the culture. And whereas in the past, you might say that, oh, Americano poasu or Chamorron poasu how, that, oh, that's so sad that you don't know who you are. But that's become the norm now, is that more than 80% of Chamorros cannot speak their native language. The majority of Chamorros do not live in the Marianas Islands anymore. And so the dynamic for our people is changing dramatically. And so the old ideas of teasing your cousin because they can't speak Chamorro is silly. If you can speak Chamorro, you may be the only one of your cousins who can speak Chamorro. It may be that everyone else can't. And so that's why these Chamorro learning journeys are important to share. Because if there are others who feel similarly, then they can understand that they're not alone, but they can also see that there are others who are trying to learn and, like canoes, gathering in a fleet to sail long distances, find new lands, right? You can sail together. And so I'm happy for those who have decided to join me today in the Zoom room, where they can share their experiences. And so we'll start off. And so put for what, just to get things started, go ahead and introduce yourself, your family name, and so on. And then just a brief introduction, and then after that we'll get into more detailed introductions. So Patricia, put for what Hagu Finetna.
Hafade todos hamzu. I nananhu si Patricia Ann Pokagwi Buki. Si nananhu Inananhu si Josephina Kamenga Rios, Giza Sinhanya, Zan I Tatahu, si Dabit Baza Pokagwi, Giza Zonya, Demokalo, Zan Sumasaga, Giza, Washington State.
Sidzus Masi, Patricia. And so Charlie, Hagu Pagu, and Avery Lokwi, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Guahusi Charlie, Familian Gozu, Tautau Inalahans and Tautau Mongmong, Sumasaga Giza Cambridge, Itano Massachusetts tribes, and Patgunzu Si Avery, Esti.
I'll have further comment. Thanks.
Sidzus Masi and half a day. And trying to think, Hadzi Amkotnya, Dabit or Sissy. Debit Hagu Pagu.
Fede todos sanzo ganauzo. Inan husi David Jesus dating from lo matungut zulokwi como si debit. Familien manuk zan dalalai gi bandan tatahu. Sa familien nugi zan gutus gi bandan nahu. Mathanyagu demanglu za sumasagadzu gi nigi za San Diego, California. Lo magahit na esti tanukumia. So, okay.
Biba. Sidus Mase. And then Sissy Hagu Pagu. Go ahead and introduce yourself. Put for what?
Hafade, non-Husi Natli, but they do call me Sissy. A lot of people call me Sissy. Sumasagadzu Giza, Winchester, California, familiar in Belloc. I think that's it.
Sidus Mase. And so now that we're all here, I'd love, and Patricia Hallgufen, and I'll ask it of you first. And so if you don't mind sharing for each of you, growing up, what was your relationship to Chamorro language, Chamorro culture, Chamorro heritage? Did you grow up in the Marianas? Did you grow up in the States? Did you feel connected? Or so what is your experience sort of as a Chamorro growing up?
Yes, I was born in California, but raised in Washington State. Visited Guam twice in my life, once when I was 8 years old, and then just this past summer. When I think about the prompt of like, what was my relationship to the Chamorro culture like, I think of like a buffet table or a fiesta table, and there's lots of dishes and lots of offerings. Growing up, there was some Chamorro dishes on the tables and other dishes as well. I would say like dididi lenguaje platu. There was a little plate of language that was served up in my home. Like you, Senor, you've said that, you knew body parts, you knew body functions, you heard your parents speak the language to other family members. So really did not grow up enjoying the beautiful melodic language of Chamorro, hearing a lot of it. There were other things that were served. We ate lots of Chamorro food, and another, I think, value that my parents passed on was just familia. Like we had some aunties and I had some cousins, and my sister and I, about every month we would get together because there was always a holiday or a celebration. And so we spent lots of family time. It was the girls' responsibility when we came of age to take care of all the balutan. We didn't know that's what it was called, but we divided the food and packaged it up for everyone. I grew up in the Catholic Church. And I think another Chamorro value that my parents shared with me is Ageftel, generosity, very generous people to myself and my sister and to other people, very loving and giving. So, but my experience with the language was Dididit. And I think I treated like my Chamorro heritage, it was kind of a novelty. Like I thought about it once in a while. I wasn't deeply connected to it. I could visit it and eat some of those dishes if I wanted to from the table, but I was also really interested in other things, really a lot of American mainstream culture. And so I think that's changed, but maybe we'll get to more of the story later. But that was my experience growing up.
Sidus Masi. I think that's a lot of people's experience, right? Is that if you ask them, what do you know of your heritage, your people, their regal, esteemed 4,000 years, what do you know? Doggin, Taki, Dodu, Fa. Oh, there we go. I got 4. The fantastic 4 Chamorro words. And so, but I think so many people have that experience. It's kind of like and so thank you, Sidus Masi, Patricia, for sharing. So Charlie and Avery, put for what?
So I spent, the first couple decades growing up in Guam before coming to the States when I was in my 20s. And so I had all that time to take for granted all the things that you get growing up in Guam. You kind of, think of it as the things that you're missing out on. But when I came here, you get you get a culture shock, and oftentimes, we tell people you're from Guam, that's like becomes your defining characteristic. So I think after a few years here, that's not something I would necessarily share right off the bat when I meet someone, because there's more to me than just that. But I think as I've been here longer, I miss all the things, and that gnawing, that longing is grown stronger. Growing up, I had a very I think normal Chamoru upbringing. I think the most Chamorro things that I had growing up were like spending a lot of time in Ilahan and the fiestas, and I spent a lot of time in Barragata jungles, just exploring out in the jungles by myself and with my friends. We would, kind of explore and find curious things in the jungle, and then mostly we were just there for the food and finding like the coconuts, and the heart of the young coconut tree is the yan that you pull out and you can eat. So things like that.
I grew up in the States and haven't been to Guam, unfortunately, since I was very little. And I feel like my Chamorro heritage was something that I didn't really explore or really have that much awareness of in terms of culture until around middle school, when there was a period of time where I tried learning the language through, I think, like learning Chamorro.com. And got really frustrated that was sort of the only way to do it, because I got through like the first level and I was like, oh, this is easy, I got it. And then suddenly you have to do more than just saying hello and introducing your name, and it just freaked me out. So I stopped for a bit. So I think doing the classes has been very nice, because it can feel like when you're so far away from the island, it can feel like how do we get in touch? It's not something that there will just be like in-person classes easily accessible. So I think having a virtual space to bring people together is really beneficial. And I definitely want to do more connecting to my roots in that sense.
Sidus Masi, Charlie, and Avery. Sidus Masi. And we already have a question for Charlie. Do you have any Tautamona stories? And so if you have any that you want to share, we'll come back. We'll give you a chance later to share some. But David, let's go to you now. So put for your relationship growing up to Chamorro things, Chamorro language, culture, heritage.
Yeah, for me, honestly, I was really fortunate. My mom's side, growing up, I think all of her siblings were out here, and on my dad's side, half of them. So I mean, I had like 10 uncles and aunts out here. It might as well have been Sangsong, San Diego, because like my grandma's house, she lived right next to her cousin across the street, like more family. Like just in like the 3 blocks where I grew up, there were probably at least 12 Chamorro families. And, I mean, obviously San Diego being like the Navy hub that it is too, right? You have the military, and so a lot of Chamorros are in the military. For probably the first 20 years of my life, we were going to the Guam Club every year for the Zonia Fiesta, which I remember dearly because it's always around my birthday. So like, yeah, for me, I was very fortunate. I swear I went to a Lesaju, like I went to like a novena like every month. Like it was just something happening. Fiestas all the time. Small parties were like parties of 50, right? Like to me, that's like what I remember growing up. And so I'm actually kind of ashamed and surprised that I didn't learn the language sooner, because I was always hearing it, and it's funny because like growing up, I was always trying to sound just like my grandmother's, because I thought it was cool. Like a Chamorro accent, I always thought was the coolest thing, right? The way she would scold me in Chamorro. And I was saying it back to her, and I would get in trouble, but I'm like, yo, this is so cool. But yeah, very familiar with all the Chamorro food, fiestas, things like that. All the things I didn't realize were Chamorro values until I started learning the history and learning the culture more. I was like, oh, I thought everybody did this. I thought you just gave people a plate of food as soon as they walked in the door, and then a month later, their family. You know, like that's just all the, you know, like see Patricia said, that a gift out, that nafat malik, all those things. I was very familiar with it, and yeah, that's Sangsong San Diego for you.
Si Juice Masi Hungan. The Chamorro force is strong in San Diego. Strong, and it's got different pockets. But yeah, San Diego's a pretty strong place. Although Washington State definitely is up and coming. It's up and coming. And so Sissy, Putfabot, Halgu Palgu, tell us sort of about your relationship to Chamorro language, culture, and okay. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. Fortunately for me, I was born, raised, I left Guam when I was 18. So the culture shock moving from Guam to California was really like, I was so shocked because I was moving in with my cousins. So my broken Chamorro, all the things that I said in Chamorro, you know, like I'll be walking in the mall and I'll be like, oh, it smells like fafa in here. And they'll be like, what is that? So it was shocking because I didn't think I would have to explain. And then I'm like, what is it then? You know, and so I would point like to my, you know, now I know it's armpit, because growing up, you know, everything, it was always fat. Like even in school, like you go home and it's fat. So that was a shock. But growing up back home, I never even thought I was going to leave Guam. So I didn't take learning from my parents as an advantage, but growing up in like a broken home where my parents were divorced, my dad was the one that spoke strong Chamorro. And then my mom, she's half Italian. So growing up for her to be for my grandmother to respect my grandfather, they didn't really speak Chamorro, only to like the elder two children. So my mom wasn't really given the chance as well to speak Chamorro. And I think at the time that they were going to school, the language was banned. So, you know, it was unfortunate for her time. And then for me, it was like, oh, I'm going to be on Guam forever. I'll pick it up at some point. And then, you know, moving out to California, like not always hearing it, it was, you know, it was unfortunate for me. And then being teased or like, why do you speak like that? It kind of made me change how I spoke. And so, you know, attending your classes, Senor, it makes me feel, you know, much closer, because all the jokes that you say, it like just brings up like what I remember hearing all the time. And so, you know, my kids are picking it up. They love like listening to your, you know, your class and hearing it. So, you know, that was, I guess, it for me growing up. You know, like a lot of everything was like even talking slang with my friends at school. And, you know, it was a good feeling.
All right, Sidzus Masi, and I'm glad that your kids also enjoy listening. And as a teller of dad jokes, nothing makes me happier to know that people appreciate the terrible jokes that I tell. And so let's so all of you have talked about trying to learn Chamorro in different ways, sort of that, you know, you've come to my Zoom classes, but you've also tried in other ways with your family, through other resources and so on. And so how has your journey been explicitly about learning the language? Have you found help? Have you found allies, those to support you? Have you found obstacles? Because one of the things that I unfortunately hear quite a bit is, you know, that families are not supportive of it, that they tease or they put down the idea of learning Chamorro. And so sort of, have you been supported? Have you found help? Or have you found obstacles? Patricia, Hago Finetna.
Yeah. First, if I could just say, like, from not having much exposure and really treating my heritage and language, as a novelty, I would say that it really changed in like the last 5 years. And there was certain, events and significant situations that led to that. Is that okay if I share this part too, Senor? So first, like from a professional standpoint in my field of education, I took some classes on like racial equity, and I learned about race and identity, and I like really started to ponder and study that and thought about like, how does this impact me? Then Ilahihu si Aiden, I think when he was in college, he really started to embrace his Chamorro identity, and he would share lots of things with me and talk with me. And so we've been in close touch about that. Then Asaguahu is a history teacher, and he loves to study culture. So he would read things about Guam and be like, did you know this about Guam? Did you know this about Guam? I'm like, no, I didn't. And so all those things kind of started stirring, like this whole desire to get in touch with my heritage. And then Señor's, language classes, when they came online during COVID and I checked it out, it was like, oh my gosh, I really want to do this. I too, Charlie, like tried learning tomorrow, but those online without accountability and relationships just wasn't the learning style for me. And I'm grateful, si Diyos maasi para familiahud and gatsonghu. I have lots of support for Chamorro language learning. Like everyone is really into it with us. We play Guam bingo as a family. No one has teased me with all the mistakes that I make. It's brought our family closer together. I'm in touch with cousins that I was never in touch with. So the impact of learning the language is just spreading, which is beautiful and so appreciative. But I am receiving a lot of support, Senor, and enjoying the classes. For the first year and a half, I was taking like 2 hours a week. And then I had the wonderful opportunity, si Diyos maasi, June Pangalinin, Armagahaga Chobik, for organizing the immersion program that happened in June. That was a significant experience as well in my language journey, as well as the culture and being on Guam. So yeah, I think that kind of explains like how it's gone. And it's now I'm studying I'm going to classes for about 4 hours a week, and trying to just squeeze in more practice, going over those verbs and pronouns in between so that I get them in class. But it's been very positive, and my family and friends have been completely supportive.
Oh, Sidus Masi, Sidus Masi. And so Charlie and Avery, sort of how has your your learning been, especially with connecting to others, getting support, put for what?
I think connection has been like the most important thing for me. I started the classes last year after Avery had sort of taken the initiative and started attending the Zoom, and that motivated me as well. And during that time, I wasn't really thinking about. I wasn't in a space where I could really take on a new language mentally. But I stayed on the Zoom because what I got from it was that sense of community and connectedness, and just really enjoying the company of Chamorro people, which is something I really miss. Like the funniest people that I know are Chamorro people, and it's just it's just a joy. And I think that for me, being in the States for so long, I always kind of thought of being Chamorro as like something that you wear, the shirt that you wear. But I think as I sort of began questioning sort of what Patricia was talking about identity and thinking about all the things that are all the trauma, all the things that are wrong in my life, and what happened in the past that brought me to this point and brought my parents to this point. It is where I've always wanted to go. So connection has been the thing that has gotten me to the point where I'm finally able to start learning and speaking a little bit, because once you start speaking a little bit, it opens up your mind and you start seeing things and putting the things together. And I'm really just still like trying to get back to the point where I was when I was a kid and was hearing it all the time and had such a bigger vocabulary. I had 2 years of Chamoru in school, and I had family who spoke it all the time. So I'm in terms of that, I'm just getting back to where I was.
Yeah, I think most of the speaking that's been happening has been within the family. My dad and I are the main people who do the classes, but recently we're trying to make it more of like a whole family thing with having it on the TV and all of us just sort of like during the practice things. My sister is really into it because it means that she can insult me in multiple languages. We've also been trying to talk a bit more with my grandmother, who I've not always been the best at keeping in touch with, but I remember when we were younger, she teaches like a few words, like I think the main ones were like galagu and hanam, but now I know like a few sentences, trying to intersperse that in our normal conversations. I've also sometimes just like thrown it on my friends with no context, because I throw a lot of things on them with no context anyway. And a few of the ones who are just really curious about what I'm talking about will attempt to translate it. So that has been fun.
She mentioned my mom, and my mom speaks Chamorro, but and she was born, and my father as well was born in that post-war period. And I remember last year in one of the classes with in the Fina Chamorro with Sunil Maget, who's talking about how after the war, the speaking of the language just kind of drops off, and it drops off so quickly. And I look at all of my parents, their cellos that are older, all of them can speak fluently, but all the ones who are younger, none of them can speak. And it's just so stark, that drop off. And even growing up in the renaissance of the Chamorro revival of dance and music was everywhere and, you know, celebrated. Even during that time, learning Chamorro was kind of a chore, and you get the sense, even though they're saying Chamorro is important, everything that you see about being successful and fitting into, you know, going to the States and fitting into the American culture is all about speaking English and learning English well. So yeah, I think the path that I want to go on is one that's not in the language of necessarily the Americans, but of the people who are my people.
Sidus Masi, you make such an important point there about the fact that the Chamorro Renaissance increased the pride, it increased cultural visibility, but it hasn't necessarily helped the language as much. You know, and that's why I was talking to somebody, you know, the other day, and I was saying, you know, the Guam Visitors Bureau, the tourism industry loves our food. They're pretty good with our culture, but they don't care about the language because there's not a lot of money to be made off of that, right? So that's why, you know, that's one of the things that our people struggle with, is that keeping a language alive that you've been told for a few generations is useless, and then sort of not having the monetary incentive when we've been taught that everything has to be for monetary gain nowadays. So Hugo Fagradesi, you know, I appreciate you sharing that. And so David, how has your journey been going?
In the beginning, Kitinituhunya, pandemics, that's when I started. It was kind of rough because like, you know, like when you start when you first start learning an instrument and you're like really bad and people don't want to hear it. That was me, especially because like my parents can understand a little, my mom more so than my dad, but I would say things and she's like, that's not right. I was like, what? Come on, you know, Azuda then, right? But she's like, oh, I don't speak it. So in the beginning, yeah, it was rough. And then I remember when I started to get more comfortable being able to speak simple sentences, you know, I told my mom's sister, she's the like the only fluent speaker I have out here who I can just regularly see and have conversations with. I was trying to speak with her and she's like, hey boy, or Chamoru's Antigu. I was like, what are you talking about? Right. And it's because I had told myself I was going to try and use less Spanish words, but then I realized it made, or like Spanish loan words, and I realized that it made the conversations a little bit harder. But, you know, honestly, as time went on, people were like, oh, the bit's really dedicated to this, right? Like I was out in the Mating and just like every day, just pointing at things randomly. I'm just walking. I'm just like, ooh, you know, hafedzu, or just randomly dictating my life as I was going out and about, just randomly at Target. I'm like, I did nyalingzu, I did zazastu, you know, just, and people were just, and my friends and my family were like, what the heck? But it's come to the point now where, you know, 2.5, close to 3 years in, I have a really strong support system. Shoot, I show up to parties and people are like, hey, David can speak tomorrow now. And it's kind of funny because it's like, all right, hold on. Nanga, don't go telling everybody that, because like I can, you know, but next thing you know, because I remember I went
Challenge
to a party.
accepted.
Yeah,
Challenge
again, right?
accepted.
I went
That's,
to a
you know,
party
once
recently.
once there's the people at Chamorro parties, once they've identified the young person learning Chamorro or who can speak Chamorro, they target you, they cruise in, and then they unleash like a rota rant on you.
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
blah, 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 and you're just like, whoa, hafa.
Who go
Just got to be that person, even if you're not feeling up to it. Just be that person.
Yeah, because I know I went to a party recently and they sat me next to some Manamku, and it felt like I was talking to the Tetsas. I was like, oh, so I did that thing. Oh, Hungan, oh, Hungan. Oh, yeah, Maulit, Biba, just random, you know. But more so recently, it's actually gotten a lot easier and it's gotten a lot more fun. Finding the various ways that I can speak Chamorro with people, right? Like me and my prima right now, we're just sending voice notes. Cada dia, just ufino Chamorro degrees, you know, hafino Chamorro di Zuloqui, and it's cool because honestly, like I'm like venting in Chamorro now, and I'm like, oh, how do I say this, you know? Or, you know, now I can be out and about and I'll just like nudge my mom and I'll start talking smack about someone. I'm like, hey, estimate, and she's just like, yeah, hey, what's that now? And I'm like, yeah, comprendido, you know, like whatever. And then, so like for me, it's fun now. And I have a great support system, all the different ways we can learn and teach the language and speak to each other. So, you know, it's just like, I don't know, it's really fun now. And definitely I get lost in it though, because I'm also a nerd for the details. Like I'm a real big fan of learning like the linguistics behind the language. And so every day I'm like referencing stuff from like Ecomission and also trying to find more stuff from like the CNMI. Like I really like those things, because it wasn't until I started learning the language to like actually learning, I'm like, oh, that's why it's called Tanaktak. That's why it's called Finet Deni, you know, like these things actually mean things. Yeah.
Yeah, I like learning the compound words where you think it's one word and then you break it apart and into its individual parts.
Yeah, like finding out like when like the fan, like the circumfix, the fanzan or the fan, right? Like fandiska, fandiskan sodzan. I can't even say it right now because I'm just like, oh, that's so cool. So I'm just making up words now. Like, oh, this is a place where I do this. Right? It's like, oh, the Esti Fangimenan, right? The place where I drink, or I don't know. I don't know if that's actually a word, but
Hungan. Oh, Hungan. And then you can always augment it. Fangimenan Carabao. This is the place where the Carabao drinks. Fangimenan Lahi. This is the place where the man drinks. You could always augment it like that as needed. But Sidus Masid a bit. And so Sissy, to you now, how has it been for you in learning Chamorro?
Well, for me, it's obviously the support between my son and my two husbands, like here in my home, has been very helpful. Um, but like trying to find somebody to speak with or communicate with or ask for help has been really difficult because like when I would call my mom, she's actually the only one the communication that I have to actually speak it or like to get help from. It's hard because she doesn't she's not fluent, like she can speak it, but she doesn't know how to like really put it in like specific words for me or like explain it to me. Um, like break it down. She can only say it. And then I'll be like, okay, well, how does it work? Which word is which? So it's hard, especially because I'm in California, she's in Georgia. So sometimes the time difference is off or um just having to be on the phone only to do it. So, it gets really difficult. So I basically try and do everything like on my own. I look through the app, I do Google a lot. I did recently just have a friend that is willing to help, with the language, but then I get so nervous even asking because I don't know, is that person busy? I don't want to be like an inconvenience. So a lot of the times it's just certain things that I try to do. Like I remember growing up and it was always around me. So I do want to get back all the things that I did know when I was younger. Um, so sometimes my memory will be refreshed on like, oh, I remember using that. Or like if I, hear other people speaking, which is very rare here for me. Um, I try to remember the little words. Um, my dad is the one that speaks like the most out of, I guess, my dad and my mom's children. So he's on Guam right now, but again, like he doesn't really know how to break it down. He doesn't um know sometimes a lot of the times when I speak to him, he just throws out like a Chamorro word. And then I'll be like, okay, wait a minute, what is that in English? And he was like, huh? And I'm like, okay, so then that's when I'll go in and I'll try to spell it out in the app, but then I might be spelling it wrong because then it says like, oops, it's not right or something, so then I just, sometimes it gets overwhelming. And that's why like sometimes I'm like, I wish somebody was like around here to like help. I did get excited once when I worked with somebody that was Chamorro, but I sometimes I find like a lot of the times when but I don't know what it's like now on Guam, but for her, it was so hard for her to try and speak as much as she knew to me. So I didn't know if maybe she was afraid, like, out here we can't speak anything but English, but then you see other people speaking their own languages. So it kind of was like threw me off. But for me, it's difficult because I don't have many resources here. My husband was born and raised on Guam, but he only knows like what he was surrounded by, which was friends. He's he's not Chamorro, so he didn't have that language growing up every day, like I did. And I feel like I should know more, but I really like it's hard because it's been so long since I've been back home. Well, I have visited quite a bit going back home, but I mean like to hear it every single day, so.
No, thank you all for sharing. We have and so if you're watching, wherever you're watching from, put in the comments Manonai Sumaskaha, where you stay, Hadzi Familiamo, who is your family, just so we can get a sense of who all is out there. I see Senora Lillian Cruz. Senora Lillian is a huge fan of Fanachu, patron for Fanachu, and so Senora Lillian is always out there sharing Chamorro news, Chamorro culture and language to Zusmasi, Senora Lillian. We also have Dana, who is also a Fanachu patron, who wants to thank everyone for having this conversation. She says, my grandma would giggle when I asked her to teach me, but she would always speak Chamorro at home and with friends and to me growing up. I miss her, and this podcast and other content makes me feel connected again. Sidus Masi. Sidus Masi Dana. And so, yes, put into the comments. Yeah, what everyone was sharing there, it really got me thinking. You know, it really, really just got me thinking. Even to now, Sissy, you mentioned something that sometimes for Chamorros, there's a strange block around learning, or it creates sort of this anxiety and this stress. Sometimes if they're older, it comes from being punished for speaking the language, right? That sort of you were punished, and even if you kept on speaking it, in a way, you kind of were conditioned to not speak it to those younger than you. You'll speak it to your friends, you'll speak it to your cousins, you'll speak it to your elders, but you unconsciously or however learned the lesson and internalized that you don't use it with children. English is for the children. And I've had lots of experiences where I've had Chamorros who literally couldn't speak Chamorro to somebody younger than them. Like it would cause like emotional and psychological harm to them because, and I always tell the story of a woman from Malolo who I was interviewing, and and her family wanted her to tell her story in Chamorro, and she would start speaking to me in Chamorro while we were filming, and then she would switch to English, and she would just keep switching to English. And eventually it came out that part of it was her being punished for speaking Chamorro, but also her husband getting angry at her for speaking Chamorro to their kids when they were on bases outside of the Marianas. And that the kids need to stop speaking Chamorro, they need to speak English and stop speaking them. And so all of that had made it so that she struggled. She really struggled to speak Chamorro to me. And so in your learning, have you had any moments where sort of things got very intense like that, where sort of family members became sort of antagonistic because because maybe you were asking too many questions that they didn't know the answers to, or that people felt like, because I think a lot of it may come from people, who grew up, like some of us here grew up around Chamorro, but then just don't understand why we can't speak more. Like, why didn't we learn more? If everyone around us spoke Chamorro, how come we didn't get more? And so if you don't mind sharing, and this is, for everyone, if you don't have any stories, then you don't have to, but have there been any moments that were very emotional or difficult in your learning journey? And I see Patricia Hungan or no, Debit. Okay, so Debit and then Sissy and then Charlie and Avery, if you have something to share too, but Debit, go ahead.
Okay. So not emotional in a bad way, but I remember with my mom's sister when she got comfortable with me, when she was like, okay, sinigui for me tomorrow, right? She was like, okay, David, the bit's getting that, right? So I remember we were barbecuing, we were at the table, and I just started asking her because I think you had even mentioned like when you start talking to the manamku, ask them simple questions, right? So I was just like, auntie, like, hopefully mas zamuna, and then I was just throwing those out there, and I was like, like what was it like growing up, right? And that's when it got like tadong, right? Like she started telling me a story, and it was so interesting because she told me a story that not even like her siblings really knew, and like we were crying. Like it was the first time I had a conversation in Chamorro longer than 2 minutes. We were talking for like 20 minutes, and I was just like, oh my gosh. She told me something about when she was growing up and how she was raised and stuff. And then like I remember I like hugged her afterwards, and my mom was like, what happened? And I was like, Mom, how come you never told me this about auntie? And she's like, I don't even know what you're talking about. Right. So I go to her other sister. I'm like, how come you never told me about this? And they're like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Right. So it was just like a real emotional moment like that for me, where it was like, wow, like the fact that, my auntie was much older, and like it took me learning Chamorro and somebody younger speaking Chamorro to her, having these conversations for her to open up and be like, you know, hey boy, I'm gonna tell you a story, right? And really, it was like that moment where I was like, man, I need to take this even more seriously, because it did make me think about how the fact that I can speak Chamorro now pretty good, but I can't remember in Chamorro, if that makes sense, right? Like all the things I heard growing up, you know, like okay, oof, okay, dispensa. Like I'll never be able to translate conversations I heard my grandparents having in Chamorro, right? And like that hurts. Like to think that I grew up around them. Like my grandmothers watched and raised me, right? Like up through high school and stuff. But every single thing they said, outside of like a, you know, Basta and things like that, like I can't translate those. I can't remember those, right? So now it's, for me, it's like my mission to create those memories in Chamorro now, right? I'm record myself saying things in Chamorro. Like I record my son just doing random things, but I'm talking to him in Chamorro while he's doing it. And I think he can understand me, which is, you know, I'm like, oh, cool. I mean, it's like little things. I'm like, hey, sige magu, you know, suli izuno and now. And he's like, here, daddy. And I'm like, oh, sweet. Okay, you understood that. But yeah, jumping back to the emotional part, it was that conversation with my auntie, and she opened up. And ever since then, now every time I see her, we kind of just like, I feel like we're a lot closer, you know. I remember like we were talking, we were having there was a party, we were all sitting, all of us in the living room. And then I said something to her in Chamorro and she spoke Chamorro back to me. And then we just kept talking and everyone else is like, are you gonna fill us in on what's happening? And I was like, hey, David, you know, tomorrow, like, but yeah.
Sidus Masi, a bit for sharing that. And Sissy, I wanted to give you a chance now, if you wanted to share sort of, was there any sort of emotional moment? And it could be something that was difficult, or it could be something that was beautiful and profound, you know, like David was sharing.
Well, so a lot of the times when I try and ask my mom for help and it doesn't, you know, it gets hard to communicate about it, I break down. So then I'll start, you know, because there's like really, oh my gosh, me too, I'm gonna get emotional, but it's hard to know that you don't have like much of a support and it's something that you really want. Sorry. Yeah, like it, you know, growing up on Guam, it didn't really sink into me that I would want to speak it until I moved out here, and then, you know, I dealt with like racism and everything about being Chamorro, so that was hard. And then one of my aunts that were out here too, when I moved out here, she ended up, you know, getting really sick, and just to go and visit her, she only spoke Chamorro like when she started to when she had her stroke and she got paralyzed. So to not even be able to speak to her anymore, that was hard because she only spoke Chamorro. And so recently, you know, because I've been doing the class since I think like 2019, so it's been hard for me to like continue on because I get really emotional. But I just recently was telling my mom, I was like, if something happened to my dad and he goes to his, you know, if he goes back to his first language, that would be Chamorro. And I would never be able to speak to him. And so it's hard because it's scary to know that there's not, I mean, you guys are help and I'm very, very grateful, you know, to have support from you guys, but like within a family, like to know that you only can depend on one person, which is my mom, and I don't want to, you know, I don't want to pressure her too much because she doesn't really know it much. But to know that it's something that you really want, and it's hard to get to. Sometimes it's like you can never see the end. Like, I don't want my dad to get, because he's sick right now, so I don't want to not be able to understand his last words, or for me to not be able to express how I feel in Chamorro to him because he won't understand me. So that's my emotional part of it. And so yeah, so I'm a very emotional person, especially when it comes to being
Maulika,
Chamorro and the
Maulika,
language, and so thank you very
that's
much.
okay. That's okay. Chamorros, we need to be more emotional about these things. Not as emotional about fighting over the family land or something like that. More emotional about these types of things. But I think we have in one of our comments, somebody was reminding us, Sidusmasi Brian, saying that Chamorro is a language that's 4,000 years old. And so, some of the words which you have used today are words that have been around for thousands and thousands of years. And in preparing for a lecture that I have to do tonight, I looked through some of the Spanish accounts where they were talking about how at Letexan in northern Guam, there was a school where there was a Magalahi Apuro who taught poetry and chanting and debate to the youth. And there was probably lots of schools like this, but the Spanish didn't write a lot about them. But in these schools, Chamorros, the youth learned to chant back for hours and hours in their history. Thousands of verses. And that when families would gather, boys and girls, men and women would go out and then sort of see whose family knew their history the best, whose family could recount more stories of the past than the others. And so it's up to us. We feel the weight of that sort of Chamorro has been around for so long, but we can hear the end of it. We can hear that it might disappear from the lips of children. It might be gone sort of from the voice of our elders. And sure, it'll exist in the many audio notes that David is making, and in podcast episodes like this, but that doesn't necessarily replace sort of living, breathing communities that use a language, right? So that's why, it's okay for us to be emotional about this, because this is us feeling the responsibility that, that this is not just a bunch of words, and they're not stupid or useless because they're not English words. They're valuable because they're our words. And so let's keep them. Let's keep saying them. Let's keep them going. And so Charlie and Avery, I wanted to give you a chance if you wanted to talk about some of the more emotional aspects of learning the language.
I think for a long time, Chamorro for me was just, it was too hard to even imagine learning, just because the whole idea of it was just pain, and I was trying to avoid that. You just said that, this language is thousands of years old, and, we had 400 years of Spanish occupation, and the language, adapted but continued to thrive. And then just in the last, 70 years, it's just gone down, down, down. And even though Chamorro was a little bit encouraged when I was growing up, the lessons that the older generation learned, like you said about speaking English to the younger kids, that, we learned that lesson. We received, secondhand that trauma. And and I was just thinking, growing up, all my elders would speak Chamorro to each other, but never, to the kids. And, looking back, I think the only time that I had that experience of elders speaking Chamorro to me was when I was like in Washington State at like a fiesta. and they were speaking Chamorro to me, and I was embarrassed because here I am from Guam, and they're they're in the States, and so I'm a Malawi for that. And I think at later points, I had the same experience that Ceci just brought up, where I was kind of trying to learn from my mom, but then when I go back and ask her questions about like, why do you do this, or how do you do this, and you try to break it down, and because they never grew up with Chamorro grammar, they just know it from speaking it. They never I try to text her, but I think she's even reluctant to text as much because she probably never had to write it as much. But I think I see it now as a way to connect, and I wish I had connected more to my elders and been able to do that. And another emotional thing about the Chamorro language, like whenever I hear like a speech, or even like the governor's last acceptance speech, when she does her any kind of speech in Chamorro, like it just, even though I don't know everything that's being said, it just gets to you. Like when you hear that, it just hits you hard.
Hungen. I mean, and I think that's that feeling of something being yours, right? Is that, we may use, people forget that you can learn many languages, right? You can hear them, use them, learn them, but there will always be a language or languages which will belong to you, sort of that they reach you in a deeper way. And as you said, in the past few generations, Chamorro is kind of, not everybody, but most Chamorros accepted sort of the lie that you should only speak one language, or that you should give up your language to learn another language, forgetting that we're all capable of speaking multiple languages. And in fact, it's wonderful to speak more than one language. But yes, thank you all.
I remember when I was young, I had the chance to go to like Saipan and Luta for like brief visits, and you go there and it's like, Chamorro people, they speak Chamorro in their families, and it's just a completely different experience. And it's so great to see that most Chamorro is still, it's still alive there.
Senor, I think that, our stories of like overcoming the challenges of learning our language, I really feel like the language, Baba Ipeta to the cultura, like it's really opened, learning the language is opened up, like understanding my culture and heritage to a place now where I'm trying to represent and associate Chamorro with every aspect of my life, maybe to the obsessive point, but Toto Malika now, like it's all good. But I think that maybe a message to share with people is like Teatro Sal, like the moral is it is not too late. Wherever we are, whatever our experience been, it is not too late to learn, to invest the time, to connect with our family. Our language and our people are worth it. And so, for anyone, I'm sure all of us would say like, please join us in classes, please like try to connect and learn, because we need to honor our families and our ancestors and our Saina, and we do need our language to stay alive. So Teatro Sal.
Oh, Biba, si Diyos masi bonito now na hinaso. That's wonderful. That's a wonderful thought. Si Diyos masi, Patricia. I wanted to give. We have some fantastic feedback. Let me read through a little bit of it, and then I want to give everybody a final chance to kind of share. Reflection, if you wanted to do shout outs to your family, like, hey, Auntie June, Biba cumpleaños na, ginani familia in San Diego. If you wanted to give a shout out. But so we've got AC Ewi Taitano, Mestran Samoro, Hafade Ewi. She's watching, and she's tuning in. We have Senora Mesa, Flo Mesa, Sidus Masi, Andrew, Vizagomez Drizzy. I remember he attended the coffee shop classes and the Zoom classes. And so Cindy Dueñas, who's attending the Zoom classes now, she says, same here. When we went to school, we got demerits for speaking the Chamorro language. I regret not speaking it more to my kids. I didn't want them ridiculed in school because of the accent or mispronounced words. And then she also says that when she would ask questions to elders about things, she would be told that she was being imbiliquera. Si Diyos masi to everyone who's tuned in and has left their feedback. And so we'll start off. Patricia, or actually, Patricia, you already shared a nice, beautiful message. But if you have any final thoughts that you want to share, put for what?
Yes, of course. Just shouting out to my family on Guam, especially the ones that hosted us while we were there, and all of our family and friends that are supporting and watching today. I did want to just share a little story. When we were in the immersion program, we went to Chief Harao Academy. So also shout out to Sina Guinipi and all the staff there who are teaching our young children Chamorro language in a full immersion program. They did this, we observed many wonderful things in that school, but one thing that stuck with me is this chant that they did. And one of the teachers would call out, Hadzi Hao, like, who are you? And the children would respond and thump their chest and say, Tomorotsu. And it was a chant. So it would repeat, it would get faster, it would get louder, and just until like this exuberant moment of like Chamorro pride in these young people. And I think that like parehu question para guahu. It's the same question for me. It's the same questions for us. You know, Hadzi Hao, who are you? Tomorotsu. We are Chamorro. We are proud Chamorro. And yeah, it's a blessing to connect with all of our friends and family in learning the language and supporting one another.
Si Diyos masi. Elect si Desiree. Maulik na estudiante si Patricia. And Senora Lillian says, see you in class. And so, si Diyos masi Patricia, Charlie and Avery, some final reflections from you, put for what?
So I have, I guess I'll answer the question from before about the Tautamona. Nothing really specific other than like a few times where, you know, cousins or friends didn't, you know, do proper respect and ended up getting really hurt in the jungle. You know, I spent a lot of time in the jungles of like Mongmong, and I don't know, I guess because of that area was more, I think it used to be farmland, and I think most of the ghosts that haunted that area were the ghosts of fallen soldiers. We'd find like bullets, shell casings, and I found dog tags one time, and another time someone, not me, found, you know, an exploded bomb. So there's that. But I think there is a certain feeling, like certain jungles you would have to pay extra respect. Certainly if like there's a, you know, if there's a Nunu tree, for sure, like you got to be careful about that. But you know, other than that, you know, I have a special request, since I think just in the chance that someone knows a team that does paddling, and that if they have a good chant, I'm kind of like looking out if you have a YouTube link or something. We're outside and there's bugs.
Oh, but I was I think we were all worried that a Tautamona was visiting you.
Yeah, right. Be careful how we're talking. But if anyone knows a YouTube link or a team that does a good chant with paddling, I'm just interested for that. And a shout out to my mom.
Oh, Avery, go ahead.
My other shout out is to young people, whether you're in the diaspora or like on the island. to learn the language. I know you often talk about your kids not wanting to because it's like, oh, parents telling me to do a thing, but I'm of the youth, so therefore when I say it, it's cool. It's it's nice to learn it when you're young and you can learn things more easily. And if you're like me, where you feel like, oh, almost an adult, too late to learn a language, if like adults around us are learning them and becoming fluent, then it's definitely not too late for us young people to learn it as well. So I really encourage anyone who's on the fence about learning the language to just get started and not be afraid to like start talking to people.
Sidus Masi Avery. Sidus Masi. And so let's go to Debit now for your final reflections. And just if anyone is watching and you do have a link, Charlie was asking for to a chant. If any of the paddling groups on Island do them, that would be cool. I'm familiar with some. I'll see if I can find a link too. And so Debit, go ahead.
Again, honestly, just you for me tomorrow, you can't be, or I'm not saying you can't be, because you're gonna feel scared to speak it, but I think the more you use it, the more you'll feel comfortable. I'm not sure if this saying exactly applies, but Zanganun Tonum, Shempri Udoku, if you plant it, surely it'll grow, right? You gotta start somewhere. And I would say just start with what you feel comfortable with. Take something in your life and just make it Chamorro, right? If you go exercise every day, as soon as you're done, just start expressing how you're feeling in Chamorro. Oh, Zaphidzu, it's just, oh, Malagudzu, right? Like, I think once you start there, things will start rolling and picking up. And for anybody out there who maybe doesn't have somebody to talk to, somebody to converse with, natungudzu, siyempre beajudaha, I'll be your practical part. Hey, just let me know. I love this stuff, right? We can do voice notes. We can do WhatsApp. If you're Chamorro and don't have WhatsApp, right? I mean, come on. But you got to start somewhere and just those first steps, right? They'll pile on, and you'll see the progress. You'll definitely see the fruits of your labor.
Sidus Masi. And that's the first time that I've heard that, practica par, but I've heard par in a lot of contexts. But Wenti Esti Masahu, this might be my favorite context for the use of the word par. The unfortunately frequently overused and inappropriately used par. And even dispensers are just a little mini rant, because because pari mali, right? It's supposed to be gendered. Dude, you get like women calling each other par too. And it's just so strange to me. But dispensers. All right, Sissy, put forward your final thoughts.
I would at least want everybody, or like whoever is listening, to just keep trying, like no matter how bad the struggle is, because my struggle is real too. To just keep trying, never give up. I still push my nieces and nephews back home to continue learning the language, especially if they have the opportunity to learn it in classes, or so definitely just continue to try. And sometimes I speak it with my kids and they're just like looking at me too, but at least I'm like getting it out there, and they ask questions. So with me, my kids obviously, they're half. So if I don't teach them, if I don't continue to do something, my culture, my language could die with me. And so since I want my culture to live on, I have to start with my kids and continue to just motivate them, to do it. And that's how I get my nieces and nephews. I try to get them involved, they're kids. So sometimes they're not really interested. So, thumbs up to Avery, because, if she says it, it's cool. So, but yeah, just continue the struggle. And I know I always reach out to Senor whenever I need something. So, I would like to thank you for that. I do have a few incidents with not just the Tautamotna, but the duendes. So a lot of the times, driving on the road, I remember like saying, "Oh, Mutu, mom," and then she'll be like, "Don't say that. Your nose will turn inside out." So she'll be like, "You better ask for forgiveness." And I'm like, "What?" Um, on our family property, I guess somebody had kicked my uncle, and when he came back, he had to come back to our land because his whole leg was pok and he couldn't walk. So that was another one. And then this one night, my sister, we were all in the room. My mom's putting us to bed. And she said, "Mom, I really want to see a duendes. I really want to see one." She goes, "You better stop asking or it will come." And the crazy thing is the power shut off. And all you can hear is like rustling. And like I can hear my sister like gasping for air. So, and there were red eyes everywhere. And so she's gasping, and my mom is like trying to run to turn on the light, but the light's not turning on. So then she starts speaking in Chamorro, and like the lights turn on, and my sister's like up against the wall, like scratching at her neck. So it's just, you know what I mean? Like they're there, I guess, but and I went to Guam last year, and this is with our land as well. And I'm just, a lot of us, we try to think, okay, do you believe in God? Do you believe in Tatamotna? But it's not necessarily that you have to believe in one or the other, because I believe in both. And last year was a really hard time with my family, and we have this mango tree on our land, and lately it hasn't been bearing fruit. And so a lot of the times my brother goes there. When he feels lost, he goes there. And every time I go there, to check on him, there's always one mango on the tree. And so when I know my brother's hungry, I at least know there's one mango on that tree for him to be able to eat. So it's a mix. I know God is, he's here. And I think sometimes for us to see things or to believe it, we have to see it. And so sometimes he just brings in these things for us to see and then believe, I guess, for some people. But yeah, so those are some of my stories that I've had. But thanks everybody for the opportunity, especially you, Sinyan.
No, Tadzagwa. I think the mango tree that always has one mango left. I feel like that's a metaphor for this or something. As long as there's one fruit left on the tree, or there's always it's as what as Patricia said, it's never too late. It's never too late. And so Sidzus Masino Hamzu Todos, I want to thank all of you for sharing your stories. Even though there was some beautiful memories, some painful memories, some struggles that you've had, and so, but it was just good, and I appreciate you putting it out there, because the more that we normalize the struggle of learning, sort of the more people will try to learn. That's what I find, is that in the past there was always a strong feeling amongst Chamorros that you shouldn't try to do something unless you're perfect at it, because you don't want to shame your family, you don't want people to tease you, because if you mess up, that's going to curse your family. They're going to, like if you try to climb a coconut tree and you fall down and everyone sees it, then when you die, your obituary is going to say Familian Podung Dogan. You're from the fell on your butt family, right? And so there's this feeling of like you shouldn't try, you shouldn't make mistakes. It's better not to try. But we need to just, we need to get past that, especially when it comes to things like our language. The only thing that can prevent you from learning Chamorro nowadays is just you not trying. Even if you learn a one word every month, one word every week, one word every day. As long as you keep it going, as long as you keep the learning going, then you'll be learning tomorrow. And so I hope that you have helped, and it seems from the comments that you have definitely helped inspire some people in that regard. And so, si dus masino hamzu todos, za hamzu lokwi nu me egad za nu me ekungok nu estin episode Fanachu. Adios, esta ki manatli hitatlo. Esta.